You best be here when I come back. Rob me, and I'll hunt you down with dogs.
We don't have dogs.
I'll get some.
Where?
Oh!
Beware, spoiler phobes! You have stumbled into a storm of spoilers. This podcast is split into two sections. In the first calm section, Neil and I will cover the second episode of A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, titled Hard Salt Beef, a food item we see Doug eat twice this week. In the second storm section, Neil can use his knowledge of the book series to predict where this season is going for the remaining 2/3. We're not ruining, we're enriching.
The realm. Do you know what the realm is? It's the 1,000 blades of Aegon's enemies. A story we agree to tell each other over and over till we forget that it's a lie. But what do we have left once we abandon the lie? Chaos. A gaping pit waiting to swallow us all. Chaos isn't a pit. Chaos is a ladder.
Well, hello again. I'm Dave Gonzalez, and I have not read any of the books in George R. R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire universe.
And I'm Neil Miller, and I have read all of those books by George R. R. Martin, including The Hedge Knight, upon which this first season is based.
And welcome back to A Storm of Spoilers. We are here to cover episode 2 of A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, which means we have 4 more weeks at the very least. We'll probably do a wrap up of Neil and I coming to you every Monday after the new episode airs to talk to you about A Night of the Seven Kingdoms. If you are listening to the show right now, you have found us. Congratulations. Make sure you subscribe however you are hearing us. If you would like to get in touch with the show, you can email us at stormofspoilers@gmail.com. You could still let us know a little bit more, I think. I think you have one more episode before we're technically halfway through. So if there's anything you want to make sure we cover for those last 3 episodes, let us know. Or, of course, if you have any questions, if you would like, and we would appreciate it, you could review us on the Apple Podcast app or on Spotify. If you leave a 5-star rating, you can say whatever you want. We don't mind much. Like Gabby this week, who commented on our episode. Great episode. Went ahead and subbed. Neil, we're back being experts in Westeros. I love it. Welcome, Gabby.
Yep. Glad that you subbed. That's kind of the point. That's yes. What we're going for.
That's it. If you like us, you hear us, subscribe. Great. We will try to continue to provide exactly what you heard and liked. If you would like to see what we look like, or maybe that's how you found us, amazingly, we are on both youtube.com at the @ A Storm of Spoilers, and on youtube.com at Dave and Neil, Da7e and Neil. Eventually, this podcast, as it is called A Storm of Spoilers, will only live on the A Storm of Spoilers channel. So make sure to sign up and subscribe. That's A Storm of Spoilers. Make sure to put that A there. It's a riff on the George R. R. Martin book. It has nothing to do with anything that's been called a storm politically in the past 10 years we've existed. Imagine that's still happening. You can also get more of Neil and I at patreon.com/Dave and Neil. It's DA7E and Neil for more coverage of television shows, behind the scenes stories about movies we love. We just talked about Weapons this past week, and a Slack everyone can enjoy, especially as social media is quickly crumbling to just everywhere is bad. You know what? The Dave and Neil Patreon Slack is great. Plus, you can access the bonus content from previous seasons of A Storm of Spoilers, be that lost extended interviews or additional Game of Thrones thingamajigs from way back when this was just a one series cinematic world instead of what it's become to. And if you joined the Patreon at the highest level, the small council membership level, you will also get access to Neil and I watching Hannibal, and each week we do a breakdown of the newest episode. We are at the mid-season finale of season 3, which means we have only half a season of Hannibal to go, but we are at the peak Hannibal. I watched both Heated Rivalry this past week, Neil, and these couple episodes of Hannibal, and men loving each other in complex situations is really my flavor right now.
The vibes are vibing.
Absolutely. But you know what I also like in terms of vibes? This new take on Westeros that seems to have much less scheming and so far also much less incest. But that doesn't necessarily mean much less nudity. Neil, what happened this week on A Night of the Seven Kingdoms?
Well, Dave, this week in the Seven Kingdoms, we spend time learning about Ser Arlan of Pennytree, who had a bit of giant in him. He was a decent bloke and an honorable hedge knight, but not particularly famous, as it turns out. And as Dunk seeks out a lord who will vouch for Arlan's legacy, he does a number of things. He flirts with Tansel Too-Tall, he meets some shiny Kingsguard, he gets shit-talked by a teenage girl, he purchases some armor on consignment, he helps his bestie Lionel Baratheon win a tug of war, he watches some jousting, and he meets a number of Targaryen princes. In the end, he's left to wonder if he'll always just be a slab of hard salt beef, or if he can rise up and become a legendary knight and show them all that Ser Arlan was a great man and a great mentor. So,
yeah,
that's where we are.
The strengths of this show continue to unveil itself to me as I am watching it. And maybe it's the strengths of the narrative, but having not read it, I'm going to assume, Neil, you will correct me if there's something that is based on the books. But we talked about last week my sort of amazement that he's not really a knight, he's sort of becoming a knight, and how you said that isn't necessarily explicitly said in the books, even though the show seems to be taking a position on it. And I love that as just a pure way to get into this world where the only thing that's motivating Dunk, as it seemed at the end of last week's episode, was kind of trying to be a good person, maybe make some money. This week, it definitely evolved for me in that by the end of the episode, I was like, oh, he's not just in it to like make some money or do like a turnaround. He's also in this tournament for honor. It's to sort of like show what this quiet, complicated, and according to Dunk, good man wrought in making Dunk this type of knight. So I love it, and I think a lot of the strength in this sort of slowly unveiling of Dunk's motivations is what I will call simple versus dumb.
Sure.
Where I think a simple character, which I hope is what Dunk is, but is what I'm starting to read him as, is not a character that doesn't have the capability or the empathy to make more complex connections. It's not that he can never be Egg emotionally. It's just that he doesn't have the, maybe access to information or the brain for facts that Egg does. He does have the emotional bandwidth and the knowledge that he might be just simple to understand what Egg is saying most of the time. So I love this episode as sort of a constant volley in my understanding of Dunk the Tall as being like simple versus dumb, and the powerful, I think, capability that being earnestly simple can give you, especially when he ends up talking to some Targaryens in a situation where he should be scared shitless and worried for his life, but he manages to sort of turn that in his direction. So I am now fully on the side of simple versus dumb as an arc to be following for Dunk, because I do sort of like that when he is talking to Egg and he's like, people always assume that I'm like, kind of an idiot, and then he ends the story there. And what a fantastic grace moment for this series. I guess, am I getting a horrible mystery? I know Dunk has a long history in Westeros, and I assume has some growth over that.
Sure.
But have I misread anything? Should I be thinking that Dunk is just dumb at this point? He needs access to somebody besides Ser Arlan?
I actually love that this is your takeaway, because I think that this is one of the things I appreciate about this as the second episode of this season, because it accomplishes two very important things and does so in a relatively short episode. I think most folks will note that it's only like 32 minutes of television, which is surprising for a Game of Thrones show, because it's like literally the shortest episode we've ever seen from a Game of Thrones show. But I think the framework of this episode is really trying to do two things. Is one, trying to establish exactly what you're talking about, which is that other people assume that Dunk is this big dumb guy, right? Sort of like what Lord Ashford's daughter Gwen sees in him in that hallway. But it is more that he is just a very simple guy who was, an orphan and was raised up by Ser Arlan from the streets, from nothing, and was also raised by this dude who was a little rough around the edges. And I think this is the other thing that it's trying to accomplish, is establishing who Ser Arlan of Pennytree was and how that influenced the way Dunk was brought up, because you're going to see that not just in the way that Dunk interacts with the rest of the world, in the sense that he doesn't have all of the refinements that other knights would have. He doesn't have the sense of, we saw this when he's in Lionel's tent last week. He doesn't quite have all of the social, rules down in this world, especially dealing with highborns. And I think sometimes that works to his advantage, and sometimes that could potentially get him in trouble. And we'll also see that in his fighting style. I think it's really interesting. We get that flashback of him fighting, sparring with just the hammer. And it's like, that's not really how we see knights fight, right? Like we saw in episode 1 when we saw Sir Raymond Fossaway fighting. He was much more of the sword play we've come to expect from a well-trained knight. And Dunk is just not that dude, because he's been on the road traveling with Ser Arlan, who was, as Dunk explains, an honorable dude who sacrificed his body in service of many lords, but was not a refined upper crust knight, right? He never had the shiny armor like these Kingsguard guys we meet. And I think that's extremely important context for the rest of this entire series. So I really like that they've taken this moment. We used episode 1 to establish our main characters, and this episode comes in and slows down a little bit and establishes these two pieces of important context, all while also introducing some other important people that we'll talk about.
Yeah. And then the final thing that this sort of episode made me start thinking about, especially with the way, at least my interpretation of how Ser Arlan is portrayed from the first scene to the last scene, is when he's trying to hype up Ser Arlan, veteran of hundreds of wars, enemy to none, all these sorts of things. And we're seeing in juxtaposition the reality of it, which is a series of moments that make him look normal at the most part, maybe tell a sort of story about how a cut on his arm got super infected and killed him. All these sorts of things that make it seem a little bit truer. At first, I thought at the beginning of the episode that meant that Dunk, together with him claiming to be knighted, meant that he was an unreliable narrator. But now I'm wondering, just like in the source of a television show, because you've read these as novellas, which is an entirely different medium. As a television show, the power you get in sort of these juxtaposition flashbacks actually makes me trust Dunk and the show more, because it gives me this idea of like what Dunk is saying versus what Dunk is thinking. It doesn't give me the idea that I'm peeking into the past, to see the truth of a thing. So it is a very interesting twist of where I would, in most narratives, think that this guy's an unreliable narrator and then not be trusting him. But because of this sort of simple versus dumb dichotomy, where maybe he's not dumb, he's just simply simple, that it actually makes me trust him more if I'm seeing him encompassing all parts of Ser Arlan and still choosing to say the good things. Like, I do believe that he doesn't feel like he's lying. There hasn't been a moment, at least in the show, where he's been like, oh, it's Ser Arlan, he was secretly an asshole to me. He's always like treated me well.
Yeah, I think this is a huge advantage that the television show has over the books. And I think that, we discussed this in our preview episode and last week, that one of the big things that this show seems to be adding is these flashbacks. This is not something that we get in the books. In the books, we are relying a lot on Dunk's recollection, Dunk's stories of Ser Arlan. And I think that, the way Dunk is established in the books, he's such a good dude, right? That we trust him for the most part, but you also get a very clear understanding early on that he has this sort of lionized version of Ser Arlan in his head. And George is very good at walking this line with the way Dunk talks about Ser Arlan, where I do think that when you're reading the book, you get this understanding that like Dunk loved this man, but he was also less perfect than Dunk would suggest, right? Like Dunk is telling these like, stories, earnestly telling these stories about this great man that he remembers who basically like beat him, constantly. He was constantly clouting him on the ear. And so it's like this idea that, Dunk loved him, but he was also kind of hard on him. And like that helps the reader understand that there was more to Ser Arlan than we were able to understand. So the show, and I think Ira Parker and the writing team have done a really great job so far. And I'm really excited because like when we talked about this in the Storm last week, when we talked about the Weeks Ahead trailer, there's a lot of stuff that it looks like they're going to do in flashbacks that I don't remember at all from the books. So there's a lot of additional context that we're getting. I mean, this week is rife with it. Like there's a lot of Ser Arlan context here that is new and fresh. And I think that's all really great. And I think that the trailers have also promised us some additional context to like Dunk's backstory. And I think that's the advantage of the television show, being able to have Dunk telling us the things that he would tell us in the books and be that narrator and tell us sort of, like I said, the lionized version of Ser Arlan's story, but then also give us flashes to the reality of it is really great. And I think, we're always looking for what are they doing to adapt this story? And I think so far this is standing out to me as the biggest point of adaptation and the biggest thing that they're adding to it. And I really am very much enjoying it because I think that this fleshes out the sort of backstory and the lore of Sir Duncan the Tall's life in a way that I think will be hugely important and foundational if they're able to go the distance of like 12 seasons of this. Because, where he gets to, the legend that Joffrey reads in the book of the Kingsguard many, many years later is a very tall tale. And I think that it's really great to be able to sort of dig into where he came from, because that makes it all the more impressive.
Yeah. I guess the one thing that has thus far been nice about Night of the Seven Kingdoms is that I'm pretty sure I know what everyone's up to in terms of like their motivation. I feel like I know their motivations, which is a different place that I'm necessarily in every week. Sometimes I feel like when we're talking about House of the Dragon, I come to an understanding of what the characters are doing as we are discussing the episode in podcast form. This one feels much better, and because it's like much more direct, I'm having such a fun time with it.
Sure.
I guess the other thing I could see in this episode before we move on to identifying some of the houses is it does, I guess this was like slightly complicated. I was listening to the official podcast. They had the medieval historian, Dr. Doherty, on to talk about, he's the advisor on the show, about sort of like the position of a knight in actual medieval cultures where they were sort of like an aristocrat, but their like job was to like entertain and be like celebrities when they weren't battling. Sure. And so
they were like the professional athletes of their time.
They were like the professional athletes of the time. And so basically what if a war was on, they would have accepted Dunk pretty easily because they need the bodies and they're, not going to really debate between knight and sellsword. If you're going to define yourself as one, it seems somewhat more reliable to define yourself at least as a knight or errant knight, or a hedge knight, I guess is what they're called in this world. But then for what Dunk's actually trying to do, this is like trying to get into like an elite sporting competition. This is like, I want to, join the nationals, or it's regionals, I guess would be the better way to put it. Because we're close enough to King's Landing, it makes sense that the Targaryens are showing up. So in a certain way, this is like a Rocky bootstrapping thing, where if he could win through sport, he also gets a certain amount of social standing that I thought he could have been in for the money. We talked last week about how you could leave in the middle of a tournament if you've just, like won one match and gotten your ransom money and you just want to piss off and spend it. That's your right.
Sure.
But now it looks like Dunk is definitely in it to prove something and to go all of the way.
Right.
So
he's in it for glory, but not just his own glory, which I think is another important point about Dunk. And I think it's another reason why hopefully a lot of folks who are not book readers are connecting with this character and this particular part of the story. I think one of the reasons why people love the Dunk and Egg stories is because it's, one of those rare stories in Westeros where we're just following around a dude who's a nice guy.
Yeah.
Right. Like he's well-intentioned, and whether that's because he's a relatively simple person or not is not entirely relevant. It's the fact that he's a good dude and he gets sort of tangled up with all of these people who are a little bit more what we come to expect from the lords of Westeros. They're complex and often not so great. And I think that they're doing a really good job of establishing Dunk as someone we can very easily root for on this show.
Yeah. And I also get a little bit more into Egg. Obviously, this episode, we haven't gotten a lot of his backstory yet, but it is very obvious that this is the life that this kid wants to be living, which I think is really fun. So not only is he a little more sharp-tongued than I would be to a very tall knight I'm squiring for, especially since Dunk is constantly threatening to go upside his head. It is an incredibly fun dynamic, especially when we are sort of reintroduced to it through the conversation with Tanseal, and we come up with what I assume is going to be his sigil, even though it only gets halfway painted this episode. I just really like the back and forth. I'm into the wolf and cub thing. I think the strongest moment was at the night joust, which doesn't seem like a great idea, but lots of stuff in Westeros that happens doesn't seem like a great idea. So who's to say? But Egg is like so into it. And Dunk is having, I think he's thinking a lot of things. Obviously, there's a little bit of being scared, I would imagine, just because seeing that sort of violence up close got to do it for you a little bit, especially if in the flashbacks we haven't seen. I mean, we hear about his master sort of at one point jousting with the Targaryen, but we haven't seen that in any sort of the flashbacks. He always seems kind of frail, so like beating a frail guy with a hammer, maybe I don't know how good of a fighter he is based on that one flashback that I've seen. So he's a little afraid. He's also seeing his opponents for the first time. And I forget which lord it is. It might be the Tully guy. Is he the guy that gets knocked off his horse, gets back on another horse, and then picks up his shield?
That's either the Tully guy or it's the Hightower. There's a Hightower guy who they don't really talk about, but he's definitely got the Tower of Old Town on his shield. And I think he's the one that gets knocked off and gets back up and then does the awesome stunt where he picks up the shield and continues on. But yeah, I love this because it's a really good example of like Dunk's imposter syndrome kicking in, right?
Yeah.
It's like he's very confident, but it's an example of the fact that as a hedge knight or as a squire to a hedge knight, he's lived most of his life on the road. He has attended, tourneys before, but I think it is just now dawning on him that he is going to have to step into the ring with all of these extremely famous houses that like we recognize as people who have watched these other shows, that he's definitely going to recognize, and Egg definitely recognizes, because I think what they've done a good job of establishing with Egg is he's a smart little dude, and he's very worldly, he's very book smart, so points for being literate. That's I think very well established at this point that Egg is literate, for your scorecard there, Dave. And he's a bit of a fanboy of knights, right? Like he seems to know them all, and he seems to have a good grasp on that, which is, I guess, a very handy thing for a squire to know all of, because Dunk doesn't know any of these people, it seems.
Well, that's I think the most important part.
Unless they were in Ser Arlan's stories, he doesn't really seem to know.
He has Egg has the puzzle piece that could either help or at least exacerbate whatever Dunk's mental condition is.
Mm-hmm.
So either he helps by giving some like background information on the stuff, or I don't know. Again, I haven't watched ahead or read ahead, so I'm just saying like dumb TV trope stuff. They figure out how to collect some pollen at night and use it to make a fireball because Egg remembers that question from talking to Tanseal. Like that's the sort of thing that a smart side character that is being underestimated can give to this type of story. So I'm looking forward to that. And thus far, very much enjoying it. But while we're on the night joust, I guess we should also go through some of the houses. So I'm guessing just by the name of some of these houses that they will be continuing to show up in this story, certainly in future challenges. But is night jousting a thing? Does it happen at night in the book? Does this happen in the book?
I don't remember this being a thing that happens at night in the book. There's definitely multiple days of jousting in the book.
Okay.
So like it stands to reason that we are going to see potentially a couple of days of tournament before Dunk participates in anything. Even now that he's sort of punched his ticket. We have seen jousting, right? We saw it in House of the Dragon, in the tourney there. But I think this is really fun because, we're going to see, I imagine we're going to see some daytime jousting in this, in this season. I'm pretty sure we've seen some in the trailer, so that'll be good. But I like the nighttime of it because it does feel like the sort of like kickoff first night of a convention type of deal where everybody's
5 jousts at once.
Yeah, where it doesn't even seem like it's your standard 1v1, main event joust. It's like a opening event sort of deal. And I love that it's not it is, there are some famous knights, right? Valar, the one of the crown princes, right? Baelor's son is there. But it's a lot of famous houses that we get to see in this joust. And I think that that's part of like, if you're Lord Ashford, who apparently does some weird stuff with his horses.
Sheep. I thought it was a sheep.
Oh, a sheep. Sorry. His small folk don't seem to like him very much, but
no,
that's pretty par for the course in Westeros. If you're Lord Ashford, you're trying to program the best show all the way through, right? So this is like your opening ceremonies of your tournament, and I kind of like that it's this like ferocious joust. And for this show, it allows us to have a pretty cool action set piece very early without having to involve any of like our main characters, right? It's a pretty cool nighttime thing. Make sure your Neil settings are turned on your television. Although I thought it looks great. I mean, extremely well lit with a lot of natural firelight. And most importantly, in True Thrones tradition, a lot of great horse stunts. Definitely some digital effects, but also some actual horse stunts where some of those horses are practically falling down and doing their thing. So in honor of episodes like Battle of the Bastards, they're still paying big money for very, very well trained horses and horse teams. And I think that gives it a really kinetic energy that is really thrilling. And honestly, something I didn't necessarily expect this early in this season, because I thought we were going to just be spending a lot more time with Duncan Egg, which is all fine.
Right.
But this is great. I mean, I love House Tully, this weirdo guy biting the head off of a fish that's a little over the top, but they got to make their stand. I love that all of their shields are very clearly recognizable. We get that they don't mention the Hightower guy, but I recognized his shield. We get Longthorn Tyrell, which is a pretty badass nickname for a rich douchebag.
I haven't been paying close enough attention because a Baratheon's a Baratheon to me still at this point. But are they using the sigil without the crown around the stag's neck because we're pre?
Yeah, it's just the stag.
Robert. Okay, cool. So they are changing the sigils partially.
Sure.
Based on where we are in history.
Yeah, well, and that's normal for houses. There's actually an alternate Targaryen sigil out there in this current time period for the Blackfyres, which are the bastard Targaryens who rose up in the Blackfyre Rebellion, which is a black dragon on red, whereas the crown Targaryen, the main line Targaryens, are a red dragon on black.
Black.
And so there are some alternate jerseys for some of these houses.
Okay.
So we get that. We get.
But does it mean bastard or does it mean Blackfyre specifically?
It's
like
specifically.
Why do they switch?
Well, it's specifically made by the Blackfyres, who were bastards who were legitimized by Aegon the Unworthy
to differentiate from a blood Targaryen.
Right. Yeah, to be this is a different part of the family tree, because that Targaryen family tree has got a lot of twisted branches. So they sometimes... Well,
of course, it would be a Targaryen that tells Dunk he's using the wrong sigil because he's not, by blood a Pennytree.
Sure.
Or Ser Arlan's son.
Baelor, who we'll talk about here in a minute, very involved in the first Blackfyre Rebellion. So that is something he would have on his mind, which is who gets to use what sigil. Because that's a big thing in his era of his family. And some of the other ones that get name checked, Dave, I have some fun facts for you.
Yes, I would love to hear these.
Especially in this opening where Dunk is going around talking to all these other lords. So he mentions House Hayford. Lord Hayford, back in the Dance of Dragon days, was one of the first loyalists who was executed for not renouncing his loyalty to Rhaenyra Targaryen. So Lord Hayford was on Team Black back in the day and died for it. So the Hayfords are still around though in this time period. I guess spoilers for House of the Dragon. House Hayford survives. It is House Tyrell who he is talking to, who's like, I don't remember him. And I guess that is Longthorn Tyrell. I actually saw several breakdown videos on YouTube who misidentified that guy, but that's the Tyrell.
I thought so because his
you could see the flower underneath his
Well, and the guy doing the
vest as
chaw, I guess we don't see him again, but we see the little bald white guy afterwards at the tug of war match.
Yeah. The tug of war is definitely between House Tyrell and House Baratheon, which is fun. Did you catch the House Florent name check? He also talks to a Lord Florent.
No.
Okay, so
I would not know who that house is.
House Florent is a house in the Stormlands, and this very notably is the house that would eventually produce Selyse Florent, who goes on to marry Stannis Baratheon. So Stannis' wife in Game of Thrones was a Florent. And Lord Florent is one of the guys that Stannis burns in the Game of Thrones era as well. So that's great.
Selyse, is there nobody you wouldn't let be burned?
That's true. Yeah. And Selyse, obviously, she's having a tough time. I mentioned House Hightower. They're in the joust. They very much are still the lords of Old Town, even after the Dance of Dragons. I assume they're doing some sort of scheming down there. But Old Town is in the Reach. So it makes sense that they're there. Also, we get at least one shot of a Lannister. We get a name check of a Lannister, but I'm pretty sure there's a Lannister in the joust as well. I'm pretty sure I saw a lion's shield. I don't know if that's the Gray Lion or one of his like sons or something, but the Lords of Casterly Rock are very much here and involved. So
the Gray Lion was the one that was like the trivia question.
Yes.
That Baelor had to dunk. Okay, cool.
Sir Daemon, the Gray Lion.
Yeah.
He's currently the Lord of Casterly Rock. So I guess that would make him like Tywin's. Is he Tywin's father? Hold on. I'm going to look this up because he actually
could end up
be, because Tywin.
I remember you saying at some point Tywin could show up in these stories, just not like this season.
Yeah, because this is what 80 to 100 years before the Game of Thrones, and by the time we get to Game of Thrones, Tywin is in like his 60s, I think. Right, so he is a young man in. Tywin's father was Tytos, so this Daemon Lannister might be Tywin's grandfather.
That would make sense,
Or
especially if
uncle
he's
or some
already a
shit.
Gray Lion, right?
Yeah,
that would imply he's already pretty old.
Yeah, and if he was participating in tournaments and was like famously getting unhorsed by Ser Arlan 16 years ago, he's been around for a while. But he is somewhere along the line that leads to Tywin and Tyrion and Jaime and Cersei and all them. So I thought this is also a really fun way for this show to, again, it's in this great spot where it can be referencing all of the houses, but it doesn't have to point out that it's connected to any of these other shows, right? Like it's just, there's the Tully shield. And now we can talk about, hey, those are the Tullys. You remember the Tullys, like Catelyn Stark was a Tully. That's Catelyn Stark's great grandfather or whatever. And like, I think that's a really fun part of this show and where it's positioned on the Westeros timeline. So I'm having fun spotting all of the banners, and good call on the Baratheon sigil, because that is it is important to note that the Baratheons, while they are the liege lords of the Stormlands, they obviously do not sit the Iron Throne. That is taken up by the Lannisters, or I'm sorry, the Targaryens.
And as far as I know, that was when they or at least from the times we've talked about Robert's Rebellion over the years, after that is when he changes the sigil, as he puts
Robert put the crown on his stag.
So I guess the question, I guess that's going to be a Storm question, but I'm going to ask you about changing sigils, if that ends up being important. But we do have a Raven who came in from frequent listener Phelan, who is going to prompt us into this next section. Phelan wrote, "Please help me untangle this current gaggle of Targaryens, because without their dragons, these toe-headed fuckers are hard to tell apart, except for a touch with the Tism Baelor, who is my current favorite." Baelor is pretty great. Seems like he's at least preparing to someday be king. At least as we see in this episode. But Neil, who are the important Targaryens? I know you broke this down a little bit last week, but now we've seen them. So who should we keep in mind?
Let's talk about the three new ones the three that we've met here. I say new ones like we've met some yet, but the three that we've met. So we get Baelor, who is the Crown Prince and the Prince of Dragonstone. We've been to Dragonstone, and it is still the seat of the next in line. And we also get a name check of the current king, Daeron the Good, who is Daeron the Second. And these are his two sons, Baelor and Maekar, his brother. And Baelor is named after Baelor the Blessed, who was, I think, his like great uncle and was king 2 kings before Daeron. There was like, I think Viserys was in between. There was a Viserys in between. It's like Viserys the Second. Baelor the Blessed, though, notable for being the guy who built that big sept in King's Landing that Cersei eventually blows up. So like he was the very pious Targaryen, who was very much into the Seven. So this Baelor is named after him directly. And he is the crown prince. A lot of folks may be asking, why is he not blonde? We generally associate Targaryens with blonde, and his brother is very blonde, as we can tell here. The fact that we know how genetics work, right? Not all genetic traits are passed from the father's side. It is important to note that King Darren's wife is Mariah Martell. And this is one of Darren's great accomplishments, is that he is the one who brought Dorne into the Seven Kingdoms, and he married a Dornish woman. So these dudes' mom is Dornish. So she is very much a brunette. And so some of her children, she has, these guys have like 3 brothers at least, and I think a couple of sisters. I think they mention a few of their sisters, Rhaegar and, hold on. It's Rhaegal, Aerys, Maekar, Baelor, and that's it. There's 4 of them. All right. So there's 4 children of Darren the second, and so some of them did not get the blonde trait from their father. They got the brunette trait from their mother, and Baelor is one of them. But it's not as big of a deal these days as it would have been in like Rhaenyra's time, because obviously Darren is not having any extramarital stuff. He's only making babies with his Dornish wife. So Baelor is the crown prince. He is next in line to inherit the throne. And as Phelan points out, he is, he might have a little bit of the tism, but he's also, I think what's great about this is it establishes a few things about Baelor. One, that he's incredibly smart and incredibly sharp when it comes to understanding all of the political maneuvering that is necessary. Like, it's very important to remember that these Targaryens don't have dragons.
Right.
We are now in the era. We have not reached the era of the Mad King yet. So the Targaryens are still very much in power, but it's a softer power than what they had in the time before the Dance of Dragons. So they're still in charge, but they have to rule in a different way. And I think we see that in these interactions between Baelor and Maekar, where Maekar is still a little bit more old school, like, these people should bow down to us. Who cares what they think of us? We are the dragon, all of that kind of stuff. It's very, very Daenerys' brother Viserys, like, right. People should very just love me because Targaryen. I'm a blonde guy type of shit. Yeah. Whereas Baelor understands the reality of the situation, which is, I am eventually going to have to rule this land as the king, and I don't have any nuclear weapons. So I need people to like me, and I need to understand the people that I am ruling. So the fact that he remembers someone like Ser Arlan is not a huge surprise. Like, he is very attentive to his subjects. And I think that's one thing that is well established in the book, and it's well established now in the show, that Baelor seems like a really good fit for his next job, which is king. And I think that reflects too on his father, Darren, who I don't think we're going to meet. We might. It'd be kind of fun if we get to meet him, but we don't really meet him in the book. But his father, Darren, who had a lot of conflicts with his own father, Aegon the Unworthy. And Darren, there's a reason why they call him Darren the Good. He was a much better king than the previous couple of Targaryens, and he brought on an era of peace and relative prosperity. And there's a reason why they're having tournaments and not necessarily wars. And really, the only conflicts that they end up having are like the Blackfyre Rebellion, which is a bunch of like bastard Targaryens that think they should be in charge, and they had to be put down. So, Baelor is good. Seems like a pretty capable dude. All right. Maekar is a different story. He seems to be more of a dick. And more in line with the Targaryens that we know, right? He's more of a, his great grandfather-in-law Otto Hightower would be proud of his attitude, I'm sure. But he is also, importantly, a dude with a lot of sons in the mix, it seems.
Yes.
Right? 2 of his sons are missing. We don't know where they are. We don't know who they are necessarily. The fact that they are missing, I'm sure will come back around at some point. And then we meet his third of 4. He's got 4 sons. We meet his third son, Aerion, who's got an amazing cloak, by the way. I just kind of love the costuming on Aerion because it's definitely like our first impression of this dude needs to be, not only does he have a very punchable face, but he's also just like a rich kid, right? He is. And what's interesting about him is like Maekar, as they introduce in this scene where they're like, and his brother Maekar, who's obviously not in line necessarily to be king. Like he's like very far down the list at this point. It would take a couple of people dying at a young age for him to become king. Aerion's in the same boat where he's like the oldest of Maekar's kids, not likely to become king, but he's kind of an asshole about the whole thing. Like he still thinks he's the shit because he's a blonde Targaryen. And obviously the way he treats Dunk in this moment reflects some of that Targaryen arrogance. And I like that. I think it's a really good characterization for this guy. He's very much a little asshole, Aerion.
Yeah, no, rides in and then is immediately mean to Dunk. And so at least in this more streamlined storytelling, I know where that's going to lay.
Mm-hmm.
I do like the idea of introducing Targaryens like at least 2 at a time, because it does bring up the Varys's old, the gods flip a coin every time a Targaryen's born onto how insane they're going to be.
Mm-hmm.
But I do feel like this guy seems to be the most likely for our insane person, at least as far as we've been able to go.
Yep.
I do have some questions before moving into the storm, although my storm questions are piling up, especially while we're talking about Targaryen lineages. We go back to the Mummers again, which I love, not just because of Tanseel, because it's a great time to bring up more Westerosi history. And Neil, tell me about Florian the Fool, this week's subject.
Sure. Florian the Fool, a legendary, another legendary hero from the Riverlands, from the Age of Heroes. This is a story that actually gets name checked a number of times in A Song of Ice and Fire. Sansa Stark is a big fan of Florian the Fool. She mentions that her favorite books are the Florian the Fool books. It's Florian and Jonquil adventures. And Brienne of Tarth, I believe, also learned about Florian from like one of her nurses growing up. And there's several instances of like songs. I think there is during Battle of Blackwater, there is a bard that sings a song about Florian the Fool. Yeah, so there's just like the Florian legend. It's just another sort of very popular legend about, Florian, who was a romantic at heart and was legendary for being a knight who chased around maids, most notably the maid Jonquil. And, I think he's beloved by many of the ladies in this in A Song of Ice and Fire world.
All right. Well, good to know. It seems like, according to this quick Wiki of Ice and Fire entry, not of noble birth, but bore a famous sword. So
Sure.
our I mean, I guess Duncan throughout the entire episode is kind of wrestling with whether or not he finds himself a fool, and it would fit that we would have another legendary Westerosi fool being portrayed here.
Yeah, who the only thing that he's got on him that is of any note is his sword.
Yeah.
Ser Arlan's sword. So it's the parallels
I will
are
say,
many.
This episode, the minute I knew I liked this episode is when we dedicated an entire scene to Dunk saying goodbye to Sweetfoot, who he needs to sell. So before we get into talking about Sweetfoot, I do want to talk about Steely Pate, who is how we get to eventually selling Sweetfoot as we're on this quest to armor. What do I need to know about this dude? Seems friendly enough. Willing to give a dude a break, it seems like the Steely Pate is.
I mean, first of all, Steely Pate is one of the characters I was very much looking forward to meeting because he is described in the book as having a pretty epic beard. And
nice.
That is one thing that they have faithfully adapted. In fact, it's great because I think they kind of nail this characterization with this actor Yusuf Kirkor, because Steely Pate is described as a short man with huge hands who stands no more than 5 feet tall, with a thick chest and arms covered in coarse black hair and a black beard. And he's just sort of the goat of blacksmiths of his time. And I think what's very important is that he is at this tournament where there are a lot of fancy lords and lads who are dressing up, and we've already started to see it, and we will see more of it. A lot of these guys have really fancy armor, right, that he references. But Steely Pate is not about that life. He is about functionality. He is about utility over fashion. And that is, I think, matches really well to sort of Dunk's vibe, right? So like this idea that this guy makes armor that is just good in a fight and doesn't necessarily have to look great is kind of what we think Dunk is all about. So I love Steely Pate. I think this is a great characterization. And his whole vibe is perfect. And yet another thing that they've just like excellently adapted from the book. So yeah, and I think that it is important that he takes pity on Dunk to a certain extent. I mean, he doesn't drop the price that much, right? Like he's still going to charge him a pretty good amount. But you know, I think you would think that like if you're the blacksmith in this situation who is not who doesn't make the flashy armor, you probably get talked down to a lot by some of these people, right? If Longthorn Tyrell shows up at your booth, he's probably going to look down his nose at you because you don't make fancy ass armor and he's a rich asshole. So I think he sees a certain kinship with Dunk in that way, that like everybody else is kind of looking down at both of them and everyone is sort of underestimating both of them.
A listener correctly pointed out that Dunk only had 2 and needed 600 stags for the armor. So how much did he get for Sweetfoot? So I guess, Neil, what do I need to know economically about how much a stag is worth in this particular story world?
Well, listen, I'm not going to get into like the whole full chart of all of the different monies in Westeros. But here's sort of the important headline is that there are sort of 3 levels of coins that they deal with: gold, silver, and copper. And your golden coins are your dragons, right? Golden dragons. And those are worth the most.
Stags, we saw one of those in the first episode from the drunk guy.
The drunk guy in the inn has a gold dragon. And that's like your top level. That's like the $100 bill of Westeros. And then you have stags, which are silver. And so 1 gold dragon is usually the equivalent of about 210 silver stags.
Oh, okay.
Right. And then copper there's like copper pennies and copper stars. And we may see some copper stars. The stars are the same star of like the 7-pointed star. And those are like pennies. So like it's like almost 1,500 stars for 1 gold dragon. So that you'd get a whole bag of those. In the books, when Dunk sells Sweetfoot to the stable master, he originally tries to sell Sweetfoot to Lord Ashford, and Lord Ashford is like, I don't need another horse. So he goes to like the stable master, and the stable master's like, Sweetfoot's nice. And the saddest part about this, they didn't really establish this in the show because I don't think they had enough time, is that Sweetfoot is Dunk's horse that he was riding throughout it. And they show him riding Sweetfoot. And the reason why he has to sell Sweetfoot is because the other two horses, one of them is too old to really be worth much, and the other one is the war horse, which he needs for the tournament. So Sweetfoot, unfortunately, is like the perfect one to sell, even though it's like his favorite horse. So it makes it like even more devastating for Dunk. And I love that we get, like you said, a whole scene where he has to say goodbye. But in the book, when he goes to sell Sweetfoot, he tries to sell her for several thousand silver stags, right? Which would be multiple gold dragons. But the stable guy like sort of lowballs him and ends up only giving him like 750 silver stags. So he ends up with 750, which is going to be enough to cover the armor cost, right? Because it was like 600.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So he's going to be able to buy the armor with the Sweetfoot money. So that's good. But it's not even remotely close to what he's worth, right? That stable guy could turn around and sell her for thousands of silver. And when he gives the stable guy money for Sweetfoot to get some food, an apple and some grain, it's like he gives him several copper pennies, basically. So he still I would assume has more than 700 silver stags. Out of
gotta pay for a painting of an oak tree and some armor.
He's got to pay 10 seal. He's got to pay silver pate. He's got to pay for the mead that Egg doesn't seem to want to drink.
Oh yeah, that's right. Because there's a fly in it. There's a bug in it. Hilarious. I can't wait to see where we're going. We haven't quite gotten to the games, but that's okay because it does seem like the games are going to be the reason for the season. So I'm okay that we're not quite there. I am locked in with these two people, which does mean in the rules of television, I am now worried what bad things are going to happen to them in the middle of our story. So I guess I'm just happy we got it. It was a short episode, but it was here for a good time, not a long time, as far as I know. I mean, 2 scenes of Dunk being nice to horses. I'm sorry. One more thing I want to talk about before we get into the storm. We do get sort of like some light Kingsguard envy. We get a misunderstanding where Dunk sees the Kingsguard and assumes he could maybe become one because he thinks one is like a son of a crabber, not a son of what it sounds like is the crabber.
Sure.
How important is it to establish the Kingsguard here? Is like that a goal for Dunk beyond the tournament? Like he would like to win the tournament, but Dunk would love to be a Kingsguard. Like that's the most legitimate version of knight he could possibly be.
Well, and I think Dunk has mentioned it a couple of times in these first 2 episodes that, as a hedge knight, you only have a couple of options, right? You can travel like Ser Arlan did and just temporarily be in the service of whatever lord needs you, right? Like Lord Dondarrion's going to war with the mountain pirates. He needs some more men to fight for him. He will pay you. Or you get drafted into the service of a house more permanently. And that could be like as small as you're just now a knight of one specific house, like you're a Baratheon knight or a Tyrell knight or even a lower house. But I think the Kingsguard is sort of the top level, right? Like that's the highest you can achieve as a knight, which is guarding the king himself. And I do think that this is a good way to establish that these dudes are here. Right. They're here guarding the princes. And it's also really kind of cool because this is a slightly different version of the Kingsguard than we've seen. Right. Like their armor was impressive in the Game of Thrones days, but these dudes are even fancier. Right. I love the design of their armor because it's a shinier, more extravagant time. Like I think this is the show, even though it's on a smaller scale, and we're not visiting like King's Landing, at least not yet. We are establishing that this is a slightly more prosperous time for Westeros, or at least a more prosperous time for the royal family of Westeros. So the Kingsguard are looking swagged up for sure. And yeah, I think if you're a knight, like if you're thinking about Dunk's goals, goal number one is to gain some sort of notoriety and to do so in honor of Ser Arlan and make a name for yourself. But the long-term goal would be to get a really good knight job. And the Kingsguard is like the best job you can get, the highest paying one, I would imagine, in all the Seven Kingdoms.
Gotta get that really good night job.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly get the nicest armor, so
that is true.
That's probably like 90% of why you would want to do it.
And think how big his armor would be. It would be fantastic.
They would need so much silver.
All right, I have some Targaryen questions. I have some sigil questions. I have some Blackfyre Rebellion questions, but I'm going to save those for the storm just in case you guys don't want to have those questions answered for you yet or would like the show to address them first. So Neil, is there anything that I need to know before we head into the storm?
I think we covered it. So I think my only other calm thought is that I'm really enjoying the tonal balance of this show so far. It's doing a really good job of giving us a little bit of action. It's giving us a little bit of the castle drama. We've got plenty of jokes, and
Lionel Baratheon.
And Lionel Baratheon continues to just be an absolute star. I love that we learned his favorite curse word this week, and he uses it in such a dynamic way. Just really fun so far. I almost wish there was more of it, but I also really kind of dig what they're doing with the time that they have.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit more in the storm as Neil and I pause for the briefest of moments to assure that our assholes don't become lanceholes.
I am the storm, brother. The first storm and the last. And you're in my way.
All right, we're back in the storm. In terms of this Blackfyre Rebellion, it does seem to be eating at the edges of this, and I would imagine providing the tension that the gentry feel towards the Targaryens, that I feel feel towards the Targaryens because I'm in the middle of the House of the Dragon history, essentially, which is you can't trust these guys. They will kill you at the drop of a hat. They kill them each other at the drop of a hat.
Sure.
Is that what everybody thinks about the Targaryens when at this point in time?
Well, there is a great deal of tension among the lords of Westeros. Like I said, Darren the Good has done quite a lot to, bring the Targaryen name back into good standing, right? He brought Dorne into the Seven Kingdoms. He's sort of united the kingdoms. He's brought an era of relative peace. They've gone through some rough times, right? This is like the very peaceful times after some very rough stuff for the Targaryens. Obviously, the Dance of Dragons was terrible for everybody, and then after that, there were a couple of really gnarly Targaryen kings, including Aegon the Unworthy, who was the one right before Darren. So I think Baelor's instinct to be like, we need to be very vigilant about our PR is the right way to go about it, right? And I think that reflects the way his father rules currently. And I think a lot of that does have to do with the aftermath of the first Blackfyre Rebellion, which, Egg, we see Egg take the side of fighting against the Blackfyre bastards in the final scene where he's like, die Blackfyre bastards. He's obviously on Team Trueborn Targaryen for the reasons we discussed in the storm last week, because he is son number 3 of Maekar.
Right.
And I think one of the things the show will explore is the fact that Baelor and Maekar who are a little bit older at this point, were heroes of the Blackfyre Rebellion. They were the dudes that put down the final fight at the Redgrass Field, which has now been name checked several times.
Right. Which I believe we'll see, right? Because we talked about it on the
seems
this
like
season.
We may see that because Dunk would have been a child during that, or he may have been at King's Landing when that happened. Another fun thing, Dave, that I don't think we mentioned last week, which is another notable hero that fought on the side of the Targaryen crown, so alongside Baelor and Maekar, was a dude named Brynden Rivers from the Riverland, a bastard from the Riverlands, who would later, I believe he goes on to be Hand of the King for a while, but later in life, much later in life, he goes on to become the Three-Eyed Raven. So he I think will be, unless we meet Aemon as a child, which is also possible, right? He's around. He's Egg's brother.
Oh yeah, I was going to ask how much younger he was, considering he's just not coming out for the tournament.
Yeah, I think he's a couple years younger than Egg. So like he's around, and we could meet him, but he would be a kid. The more likely, and I think this would be more of like a season 2, season 3 thing. Dunk does come across and has significant interaction with Brynden Rivers. So we will eventually have to have a Brynden Rivers casting. Probably, I don't think it's going to happen this first season, but he eventually it becomes the Three-Eyed Raven, which is pretty cool. So that I think will be our first notable, significant connection character who actually is in A Song of Ice and Fire and is in Game of Thrones. So that'll be fun.
So if Dunk was alive and a kid during the end of the Blackfyre Rebellion, would Ser Arlan, under his original squire, have also fought at Blackfyre? And if so, do we know what side he was on?
Would Ser Arlan?
Because he's traveling around, but I guess if no one hires him, he's not going to run off and fight a war.
That is a really good question. I don't
Because
know.
I would assume that if he did fight, he would fight for the Blackfyres. Otherwise, here, Dunk would be like, my lord, Ser Arlan fought for you at the Battle of the such and such, in the Blackfyre Rebellions.
Yeah. He obviously is sort of in the good grace of the Targaryen dynasty. During the first Blackfyre Rebellion, he was at the Battle of Redgrass Field. So he fought under Lord Hayford's banners, which would be on the side of the Targaryens. And that's why Dunk mentions that his, I think it's his nephew, Roger Pennytree, dies at the Battle of Redgrass Field. So Arlan was there as well. So he was there in the army of Lord Hayford.
Nice.
So,
and then my other question
to Roger Pennytree.
Yeah. The other question I imagine we'll come back to it and we'll RIP him when we get there.
Sure.
The other question I had as we were talking is like we're going to get the reveal, I assume, of the Dunk sigil next week soon.
Sure.
Are there other like notable sigil changes from this time? It doesn't have to necessarily be from this season, but it just occurred to me when we were talking about Robert and then talking about Dunk sort of coming up with a sigil here. Like, I'm not really that familiar with sigils that change over time or even making your own sigil. I guess the closest one is the only person I know who did that before was Littlefinger.
Yeah, Littlefinger makes his own. There are several changes throughout the stories that we know. They aren't necessarily in this time, though. Like during the Dance of Dragons, they make a second. Aegon and Rhaenyra have their own banners, right? So they split the Targaryen banner. Right. I forget what the exact details of them are, but they have two different banners. We'll come back to that when House of the Dragon comes back.
Couple of months.
And so they flip their banners, and just so that people can tell the armies apart. Littlefinger obviously makes his own. Robert changes the Baratheon one when he takes over the crown. It's like very significant events have to happen in order for them to change. The Blackfyre Rebellion is when the Blackfyres come out with their own sigil to distinguish between them and the previous Targaryen dynasty. The only other one that I can think of is that the Stark banner, the Stark sigil changes at the end of A Song of Ice and Fire when Jon Snow becomes king in the North. It changes to it previously is a black dire wolf on a gray background, and it becomes a white dire wolf on a black background for Jon Snow, which is, reflection of like him being the white wolf and ghost and whatnot. But that is very subtle, and I don't remember them making a big deal out of that in like Game of Thrones season 8, because
so the Fossaway apple thing, is it going to be?
That's
the
like other one that
argument?
happens in this show.
Okay,
is the Fossaway apples. Currently, we have seen that the Fossaway apples are red.
Mm-hmm.
But at a certain point, the Fossaways are going to have a little bit of an argument.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
And we are going to split off into a green part of the family tree where the green apples will emerge. And thus begins the long and forever debate between red and green apples. But I think
I love it.
It's funny to me, though, which I'm glad I can say because we're here in the storm. I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of question as to whose side we're on in the Fossaway argument, because one is on Dunk's side and the other one is not. So like, we're obviously going to be on one side of that particular dispute. And
right. And I guess it's the Squire guy, because that's the only guy I know from.
Really, really good guess.
But luckily it looks like we'll be getting a little bit more from him on the next week trailer.
Sure.
I was thrilled this week to see at the very beginning of the next week trailer very excellent looking breakfast layout.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We've been getting really into food on some of our other podcasts. Hannibal, a great show to be about food, but also a very gross show, so it's very difficult. But Neil, I went grocery shopping last weekend. Eggs gone. So Java, my partner, very nice, vegan, tracked down some eggs against her own belief, but for me. And so I've been having some like eggs in the hole, some scrambled eggs. And instantly when we opened on Westerosi eggs, I was like, A, that looks great. B, that looks like a huge yolk. Do they have normal eggs in Westeros? Is that just an excellent egg?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are just normal eggs. We'll find out.
Hell yeah.
I think what's great about it, and this is another thing that, is a very George R.R. Martin thing, is his descriptions of food, and it's very present in the Duncan egg stories. And I think is it's in all of George's writing, but it's really great, I think, in The Hedge Knight, the way he describes food. And I do think that they kind of skipped over the potential to do some food stuff in the first episode when he visits the inn, because in the book, there's a very long description of the multiple meals that Dunk eats.
Or in the Baratheon tent, I would feel like we could have done it last week.
So I'm hopeful that we'll get some like slow down and show us somebody making some food on this show. And I do think that is part of like, we haven't talked about this a ton, George's commentary outside of the show, and how he has taken some shots at Ryan Condal and House of the Dragon, but he does seem to have a unique affection for Ira Parker, the showrunner of this show, and like to the point where he has apparently handed off all 12 Duncan Egg stories, 9 of which are not published, to him so that they can make this show. And I would say if we get like a really in-depth food montage next week, that will show us one good example of why George is really into Ira Parker.
Yeah.
Because he sees a certain, there does seem to be not just a reverence for George's work, but there's like a kinship here, I think, in the creative teams. Like the people who are working on this show have a lot of the same sensibilities of George R. R. Martin. So this, so far, and we still have 4 episodes to go, feels like the first Game of Thrones show that could have also just been written by George himself. That is not just being adapted from his work, but like if George had the time to sit down and just write a show, this is what it would look like. And I think that's pretty great. Like that is an achievement in and of itself. And I think hopefully that's how it plays out for the next 4 episodes. So yeah.
So given that we have
some food.
4 episodes left, and we do start with a cracking of an egg visual for the teaser, are we finally going to be able to call Aegon at the end of next week? Do you think?
100%.
Okay.
I'm 99.9% sure. Here's why. Most of the teaser for next week focuses on Aerion, who has a big role to play in leading us to the reveal about Egg. We also get a moment where we see Lord Ashford's daughter Gwen clearly at the games, looking on in shock of something terrible happening. And I think I know what she's looking at. And it is Aerion doing something terrible in the lists. I'm not going to spoil exactly what it is. I will just say, prepare yourself for a horse to have a very bad time. This is where it is. And that will probably be early in the day. And that establishes even further that Aerion is our baddie for this show, is our antagonist for this show. And then I believe it's the night after that event happens where we go to another Mummers play, and Aerion shows up to watch the play, and it is not to his liking. And I saw in the preview. We see him in the preview say the dragon ought never lose. And it is a play. I don't remember the exact details of the play, but it is a play where I think there is like a Targaryen who like dies, or is sort of like not the hero. And it's not even that like scandalous necessarily. But Aerion, being Aerion, takes it that way, and he seeks to punish Tansel Too Tall. And obviously, as that is happening, Dunk takes offense to that. And this is where, as we see in the other trailers, Dunk punches his very punchable face. And that is the moment in the books where Egg has to come out of hiding and reveal who he is to his brother to save Dunk from being like drawn and quartered immediately, right?
Targaryens back again.
You can't just punch a Targaryen prince in the face and get away with it unless you have another Targaryen prince standing up for you, and unless you've already met the crown prince and he thinks you're an okay dude. But Dunk's gonna be in trouble, just not as much trouble as he could have been if Egg wasn't there. So it forces Egg to come out of hiding. I did see, some discussion in our Slack about like, how has nobody recognized Egg? And it's important to note that, being bald is really a pretty good strategy for him, because otherwise he is a little blonde child and would have been easy to spot. But I also do really like in the scene where they're at the tournament where he asked Dunk to put him down, because I think he realizes that he's like in the line of sight of his family who are on the other side. So there's several little moments where they're hinting at who Egg is, right? There's the moment where they see the Targaryen banners and it just like cuts to Egg and he's just like gives a look. And then there's that moment where he's like, put me down. So I think the show's doing a good job of winking to the book readers that it knows that we know who that is, but also not really spoiling it for anybody. Like I would imagine that if you're a non-book reader, you are going to be very surprised by the end of next week's episode when it comes out that Egg is a Targaryen. He's one of the 2 brothers. Yeah. That actually, Dave, is my Catelyn Stark Memorial Ironic Statement Award this week. When
excellent.
When Dunk says to Maekar, "I trust they will not be found dead," which is not ironic because they will be found dead, because they won't. It is ironic because Dunk has already met both of the missing sons. In fact, he currently has one of them in his service. The other one he saw at the inn, drunk. So,
well, we do have some leaked episode titles, and next week apparently is going to be the Squire. So that all seems to line up for me in terms of what we are expecting.
Mm-hmm.
Episode 4, the 7, I imagine that's some sort of trial-based episode, or when we're at least going to come across to trial by combat.
I think it's important to note that these titles come from like a Twitter account.
Okay.
And they have not been confirmed. But I wanted to put them in here because I do think that if these are the episode titles, it says several interesting things about what's about to happen. I do think next week being the Squire makes sense, because it's going to be all about Egg and then the reveal of who Egg is. Episode 4 being 7, yes, is I imagine where we will find out Dunk's going to be imprisoned here at Ashford, and they are going to eventually come to terms of him having to go through the trial of the 7. And we're going to get a long explanation of what that entails. And he is also going to have to begin assembling his team of 7.
That's what I had for episode 5, because that one's supposedly called In the Name of the Mother, which would be from a vow. In the name of the mother, I charge you to defend the innocent.
Sure.
So that seems like a getting the team together thing, assuming that we're gonna do that and not have a penultimate battle episode, because I assume episode 6 tomorrow is our big
big
battle
fight.
conclusion.
Yeah, and I think that this makes sense to me as a book reader, because the process of Dunk assembling the team and trying to get knights to his side is a significant chunk of the story, and it is very important. I also think In the Name of the Mother could have a dual purpose of being maybe a flashback heavy episode, right? We have not seen any of the flashbacks to Dunk's childhood. And if we're going to go back and look at a more innocent time in Dunk's life, and maybe what brought him and Ser Arlan together, and maybe the aftermath of Redgrass Fields, I think that that's the episode where I would pack that stuff in. And it's not going to be a battle episode, penultimate battle episode. And then, yes, episode 6, The Morrow, would make sense if that is going to be our big action episode. And that also makes sense because the way the story plays out, it is Dunk puts his team together, then we have this big flurry of action, and then a couple of things happen right after the big action, and that's it. Like it very much ends right after that. And we send Dunk and Egg off on their next adventure. So I think that there isn't, unless they add some stuff, there isn't a lot that happens after the big action set piece that would necessitate an entire episode, right? So that's why you wouldn't have that big action set piece be in your penultimate episode, because you just don't have enough to do in the next episode. So I like it as the finale. And, this show is doing a lot of interesting little tweaks to differentiate itself from other Game of Thrones shows. And I think that not having the same rhythm is going to be one of those things.
Have I met the friends of Dunk, Team Dunk, yet? I know Lionel. I would suspect Lionel's going to be up there.
You've met at least 3.
Okay.
At least 3.
So I'm going to say Fossaway Squire, Lionel Baratheon. I mean, it would be fucked up if one of them went against the Targaryens, but also like a Kingsguard member would be fun.
Okay.
If he could grab some of that. I'm trying to think about who I met that would be even allowed to throw into that. I suppose.
Well, it's tough because we have to think about what the Kingsguard's rules are, which is they have to protect the Targaryens. So they wouldn't go necessarily be able to go against a Targaryen, or if they were in a melee with a Targaryen, they would not be able to attack them.
Interesting. Okay. All right, I'm gonna have to figure it out, but I am now. That's what I'm going to be looking for while everybody else is discovering Aegon.
The third one's a good mystery. I'm curious to see if you figure it out before it comes out in the show.
Can't wait to find Ser Arlan's alive from the grave.
The corpse of Ser Arlan comes.
Yeah, from the grave and the top rope. The corpse of Ser Arlan.
Plot twist: they just put Egg in armor and throw him out there.
Egg buys a horseback and Sweetfoot and Egg enter the tournament.
Yeah. Plot twist: Tansel Too Tall also a knight.
Oh, that would be great. I mean, again, they set up that thing that was the collecting pollen to do fire effects.
It's true.
Very
she's got
fun.
She's got some skills, man. She could fight.
Yeah, very fun theater effects. Neil, is there anything else that we need to talk about before we head off into next week's episode and hopefully learn who some of these people are?
Sure.
And definitely figure out how important Dunk can be on the team.
The other game that I gave you when we started is that at some point we are going to meet the Targaryen who much later in life very famously dies drinking wildfire thinking it would turn him into a dragon. I think we've now met all of the Targaryens we're going to meet. At least we can say that here in the storm.
Except
would you like to take
maybe Child Prince Aemon? Child Prince Aemon doesn't show up?
I don't think Aemon's going to show up in this first season. I think we will meet him in this series, but I don't think there's any reason for him to be in this first season.
He's a real Darren the Daring of this series.
Yeah. And I also think that, like, given Egg's age, you know, there's not a whole lot for Aemon to do at his age. He would be like one of the little kids from House of the Dragon, where it's like, they're just
we've met them all, then it has to be Aerion. Like, he's obviously the crazy one. Like, the only one I guess would be like Melkor doesn't get to be king, and so he decides to try to be something else.
Okay.
And just
it's an interesting guess. I don't want to give you the full answer until we get to the end of the series, because I also don't want to spoil if any of these dudes don't make it out of this first season.
Makes sense. I will say,
but those are good guesses. Those are two pretty crazy Targaryens.
I'm excited with Egg and Egg to be outed as a Targaryen next episode for the Call Me's, because it's been really hard to talk about how Dunk's already seen the drunken Darren and not feel like I'm accidentally spoiling that Egg is Aegon.
Sure.
Like, secret Targaryens all over, not the ones you think they are, but it is interesting, yes, that their Catelyn Stark Ironic Memorial Statement Award has Dunk's met both of them already.
I do think it's interesting, and I wonder how many people will be legitimately surprised, especially if they're on social media and they've been seeing, you know, obviously the Joffrey clip where he talks about Sir Duncan the Tall has been going around. That's not much of a spoiler, but, you know, spoiler alert, Dunk lives through this first season. You know, there's 3 novellas about him. He lives through all 3. But the other clip that's going around is people have been reposting the Maester Aemon death scene where he's like, Egg, I dreamed I was old. And that, I think, pretty much gives away the game. And I've even seen like official Game of Thrones accounts posting that, and like some of like the more higher level like fan accounts who normally would protect secrets like that, posting that and being sort of free with that information. So I do wonder if it's like the going to be like the least surprising twist in history when it happens. So I'm curious if you are, I mean, if you're listening to this, you're in the storm, you already know, but if you have Call Me friends, let us know next week after the episode if your Call Me friends who didn't know that Egg was a Targaryen were like blown away by the twist. It's obviously not a red wedding situation. You don't need to like film their reaction, but I will be very curious to see if people are caught off guard by that, or if the show has made it obvious enough that Egg is not just some random little boy.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like if you're super calm, Egg I'm old from Maester Aemon means nothing because you think Maester before you think Targaryen.
Sure.
But
if you watch the whole Game of Thrones show, you know that Aemon was a Targaryen. And that
yeah,
his
well, if you
brother
watch
was
the whole
king
Game of
at one
Thrones show,
point.
you know Jon Snow was also named Aegon. Like,
That's true.
The whole Aegon is a Targaryen name is, I think, the spoiler actually, rather than like an identity, because like I don't know that much about who he is when he's king. But one thing I know about him is that Duncan Egg is about Aegon Targaryen.
Mhm.
I knew that before this series even began. But I can't wait for everybody to catch up so we can properly track these Targaryens. But yeah, there's only one that seems crazy enough to drink wildfire right now. And seemingly also in the trailer is like the dragon would never lose, which made me think he was talking about the actual dragon. I didn't even think he'd be referring to a Targaryen. So we will see, though, what happens as we continue going to our Ashford tourney every week. And we'll be back talking to you guys on Monday as we discuss A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, Episode 3, The Squire. Until then, go out there, be excellent to each other, and prep those eggs meals for Neil and I. We're showing up hungry next week.